My wife said, "I'm going to the bathroom," and that was it. A simple, weightless phrase, the kind you hear 20 times a week without paying any attention. But that night, something wouldn't leave me in peace. It wasn't suspicion, it was a silence inside me. She got up from her chair, adjusted her blouse as if trying to hide a tremor in her chest, and walked towards the hallway leading to the restaurant's bathroom. I waited a minute, too, and when I realized it, my feet were already on the way, as if my body knew before I did that something was wrong. And there, in an empty, dimly lit hallway, I saw the end of everything I had built with her. She was leaning against the wall, her eyes closed, her lips locked with another man's. A kiss. That's all. One kiss was enough to erase a decade of my life. When she opened her eyes and saw me standing there, motionless, her eyes froze. The world stopped there. She tried to speak, but there wasn't time. I just said, "You can go back alone now." And I turned away. It was the first time in years that I felt I was doing something for myself, and not for us. And it was also the last time I looked at her as a woman. From then on, she became just a memory of someone who chose to destroy a home on impulse. In the days that followed, she sought me out in every way. Calls, messages, notes on the door, flowers, tears. Some messages were long, full of guilt, as if writing more could erase what she had done. Others were dry, desperate, as if the silence on the other end was a punishment she couldn't bear. But I didn't respond. Not because I felt nothing, but precisely because I felt everything. I was overcome by such a violent emptiness that any response I gave would seem smaller than the magnitude of the pain. Betrayal isn't just about the kiss, it's about everything it represents, the contempt for trust, the death of daily care, the breaking of something invisible that held the walls of our home together. She tried to justify it. She said it was an impulse, that she felt insecure, that she wanted to provoke me, that she wanted to feel desired again. As if it were my fault. As if loving someone consistently, routinely, was less important than the dirty adrenaline of a hidden kiss. And the cruelest part, the other man simply disappeared. She discovered, too late, that it wasn't love, nor passion. It was just ego. And now, alone, she began to swallow her own regret like a poison she herself distilled. Meanwhile, I rebuilt myself. Little by little. With the calm of someone who has already cried all they had. I reconnected with myself. I started running, cooking again, sleeping with a less suffocated soul. And one day, without planning, I met someone. Someone light, someone who didn't ask for more than they offered, who didn't make me walk on eggshells, who chose me without testing me. She found out. One day, by chance, she saw us together. She didn't scream, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, frozen, like I stood that night in the hallway. Frozen eyes. Cruel irony of fate. But it wasn't the end yet. Some time later, she sought me out in person. She was thin, dejected, and there was something in her gaze that wasn't just regret, it was loss. She tried to explain, tried to relive memories, tried to remember moments, but it was like opening an old album and discovering that the photos were already faded. I listened respectfully. I remained silent for a while. Then I said, "I forgive you. But I don't want this anymore." It wasn't anger. It was just maturity. The kind of response you only learn after bleeding silently for months. She cried. And I didn't cry with her. Years later, I returned to the old house where we used to live. I happened to be passing through the neighborhood and decided to stop. I wanted to know if it still hurt. And it did hurt a little, yes. But less than I imagined. It was a clean longing, without weight. A memory of who I was, not who I still am. But what really surprised me was what I discovered when I left. I saw a car park in front of the old house, and a woman got out with grocery bags. Behind her was the man who now lives where my home used to be. It was her. His new wife. The same man from the kiss in the hallway. He was with her. Not with my ex-wife, but with the woman who now lived in the place that used to be mine. And at that moment, I understood everything. She not only lost me, she lost the house, the project, the respect. She even lost her lover. And now it was just a memory of what could have been. That's where the story truly begins. Because what seemed like an end was only the beginning of a much greater truth. What was in that hallway, in that kiss, and what came after, hides something even deeper. A revelation that will change the meaning of everything that happened. Because in the end, her biggest mistake wasn't the betrayal. It was what she did afterward. And when that comes to light, no one will come out unscathed. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize, we don't justify, and we never condone betrayal. All the stories you will hear are fictional, however, they reflect the real consequences of choices that hurt, destroy, and leave deep scars. Our goal is clear, to show how the betrayal is always a loss, of love, of respect, and of oneself. Get ready. Today's story is intense, exciting, and shocking. Press play, and feel firsthand the weight of a decision from which there is no turning back. They met on an ordinary Sunday, amidst the muffled sounds of a crowded coffee shop and the bitter smell of freshly brewed coffee rising between cramped tables and scattered conversations. He was reading a book with a folded cover, with almost mechanical attention, as if trying to escape the world around him. She entered with a discreet yet powerful energy, dressed simply and with a natural elegance that made everything about her seem effortless. Their eyes met by accident when she was looking for an empty seat and he, without thinking, pushed his backpack away from a chair in front of him. Neither of them planned to get involved with anyone, but there was a silent restlessness in both of them, a kind of weariness that only those who have tried to be strong for too long recognize in the other. His name was Daniel, and hers, Emily. Emily was the type of woman who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Her calmness was what stood out most, a serenity bordering on enchantment. She worked as an occupational therapist in a rehabilitation center and possessed a rare sensitivity, a caring gaze that seemed to understand everything without it needing to be said. Daniel, on the other hand, lived a precise routine, amidst piles of reports, meetings, and tight deadlines. A methodical civil engineer, proud of his stability, but tired of the silence of the white walls of his apartment. He had been through a turbulent relationship years before and promised himself that if he loved again, it would be completely. Emily appeared as an interval in his logic, a beautiful pause in the midst of chaos. The beginning of their relationship was an encounter between two opposite, yet complementary, worlds. She made him slow down, teaching him that not everything needed to be solved with a plan. He made her feel protected in a way she never knew she needed. It wasn't overwhelming passion, but patient building. They had simple rituals, like sharing the same dish in restaurants or walking hand in hand aimlessly in the late afternoons. Little by little, life took shape between lazy breakfasts and Sundays in comfortable silence on the sofa. He was enchanted by the way she arranged the plants on the balcony and by her habit of collecting notebooks she never used. She smiled when she saw how he always forgot his keys and looked indignant every time he lost the remote control. Over time, they decided to live together. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a modest building, but with a beautiful view of the city. They painted the walls light blue, bought second-hand furniture, renovated some things with the help of tutorials, and, above all, filled that space with their presence. To the outsider, they were a stable, harmonious couple, the kind you see walking through the supermarket and imagine they never argue about anything. But every story has invisible cracks that begin long before the first break. Emily was careful, but also overly sensitive. There were days when she retreated into a dense, inaccessible silence, and she didn't always explain why. Daniel, in turn, tried to resolve everything with practical actions, fixing things, buying things, doing things, but he didn't know what to do with her raw emotions. And sometimes, just listening was enough, but he hadn't understood that yet. Small conflicts arose from nothing, a towel out of place, a curt reply, a last-minute cancellation. Minor things, but which, added together, built invisible barriers between them. Love hadn't gone away, but it began to express itself in different ways. Daniel started focusing more on work. New projects, deadlines that stretched into the night, short trips to neighboring cities. Emily didn't complain, but she felt it. His absence wasn't just physical, it was an emotional absence that spread like fog. Sometimes, she would wait for him with dinner ready, with soft music in the living room, but he would arrive tired, his mind elsewhere, his eyes fixed on his cell phone. Still, he would kiss her on the forehead before going to sleep. And she, even feeling alone in her own home, would smile back as if yearning for love. From the outside, nobody noticed. They continued smiling in photos, attending family birthdays, posting old trips as if they were recent. There was affection, but there was also weariness. Emily began to miss being truly looked at, being listened to attentively, being desired as before. Daniel, even though he loved her, didn't realize how much he was drifting away. Routine, for him, was synonymous with stability. For her, it began to become synonymous with loneliness. Even so, there were beautiful moments. They still cooked together on Fridays, still argued about which movie to watch on Saturday nights, still debated which ice cream flavor was the best, and still shared a blanket on cold nights. It wasn't a lack of love. It was just a distracted love that forgot to renew itself. And love that isn't nurtured, dries up, even if slowly. A drop of water is never a big event. It's always something small, that comes after many other small things. A glance that doesn't come, a touch that doesn't happen, an absence that repeats itself. Emily began to feel invisible. She sought therapy, read books about long marriages, tried to change her tone of voice, her haircut, even the way she set the table. Daniel noticed the changes, but didn't understand why. He thought she was just going through a phase. That it would pass soon. That it was just one of those adjustment periods, like every couple goes through. But while he deceived himself with time, she collected absences. She wasn't unhappy, she was lonely. And loneliness within a relationship is crueler than loneliness in absence. Because, at least, when you're alone, absence is honest. Within a relationship, absence deceives, confuses, and hurts subtly. Emily started going out more, seeking out friends she had neglected, resuming old hobbies, frequenting cafes alone, as she did before meeting him. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed that something in her was changing, but he couldn't name what it was. He felt that hugs lasted less, that kisses tasted like farewells. But, like many men, he preferred not to ask. He thought that talking about it would provoke a problem that perhaps didn't even exist. Except it did exist. It had existed for a long time. The nights grew quieter. The touches, more formal. The words of affection, more spaced out. They still slept in the same bed, but on distant islands. They still shared a routine, but like two roommates who respect each other's space without invading it. There was respect, but presence was lacking. And no one loves alone for very long without beginning to seek refuge in the outside world. Daniel, despite his distraction, loved Emily. And somewhere deep down, he knew he was missing something. He started trying small changes, leaving work early, bringing her flowers without a date, asking about her day. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it was too late. And Emily, no matter how hard she tried to reciprocate, no longer knew if she still expected anything from him. She no longer knew if she still had the strength to persist. The distance between them was a road without signs, where both walked without knowing if they were still going in the same direction. She began to look at herself in the mirror with a mixture of guilt and resentment. She missed the man he had been. And he missed the woman she was ceasing to be each day. But they didn't say this to each other. They just kept going, each trying not to hurt more than they already had with their own silence. And then came dinner. An invitation from mutual friends. A large table, laughter, clinking glasses, plates passing from hand to hand. A light atmosphere, a night to pretend everything was all right. Daniel was excited. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to relax. Emily, silent but present, smiled with her mouth, but not with her eyes. And it was there, between toasts and forced laughter, that something began to stir within her, a restlessness he didn't notice. When she said, "I'm going to the bathroom," that was all. Simple, ordinary, weightless. But what would come next, would change everything. And it wasn't that night that Daniel would understand the true depth of what they were experiencing. But it was close. Very close. Because sometimes, when you think you're still trying, the other person has already been gone for a long time. And only the body remains. What happened after that, what he saw with his own eyes, and what he would discover much later, would only be the beginning of a story that still held its cruelest part. And the cruelest part, often, isn't the betrayal itself, it's what comes after. It was 2 days after dinner that everything fell apart. The silence between them was no longer an interval, it was a sentence. Since the party, since that hallway, since the kiss that remained etched like an open scar on his chest, Daniel had vanished. Not physically, he still slept in the same apartment, still opened the same door, still left the same shoes in the corner of the living room. But his soul was no longer there. It was as if he breathed only out of habit, as if he existed only to fulfill a script. Emily tried to get closer in the first few days, tried to touch his arm, make the coffee he liked, smile with teary eyes, but he didn't react. When his gaze met hers, it was as if there was nothing between them. Nothing but what was already dead. She began to live by the rhythm of guilt. She carried the weight of her mistake with every step, with every failed attempt at reconnection. The kiss, that kiss, had been a foolish moment, an impulse born of emptiness, a desperate search for attention that she never imagined could cost so much. It wasn't love. It never was. And now, all that remained was the shadow of regret walking behind her, reminding her of what she had lost. She tried to ask for forgiveness in messages, in silence, in tears. But Daniel, wounded in a depth she would never fully comprehend, had retreated to a place she couldn't reach. The days dragged on, then came the weeks. He started arriving later, leaving earlier, sometimes he didn't even come back. And then, one day, he simply left. Without a speech, without a fuss. He took only a backpack, his wallet, and a broken heart. Emily woke up with the bed still warm beside her and, for the first time, understood that she was truly alone. She tried to find him. She called, she wrote, she cried at the doors of old friends. Nothing. As if he had evaporated from her world. As if she had never existed. It was a long month, filled with silent pain. She was consumed by regret, tried to retrace her steps, but there was no road left. The memories, once sweet, had become sharp blades. Every corner of the apartment held a memory. Every closet, an absence. Still, she didn't give up. She started going to the places they frequented, hoping to find his face among the crowds, hoping that perhaps he also felt longing. But time was cruel. And, in time, Daniel was healing. On the other side, he moved on without haste. He sought neither revenge nor reconciliation. Only peace. He began to live more lightly, learned to be comfortable with silence. That silence was now his, not imposed, not heavy. It was freedom. He discovered new routines, relearned to cook, reconnected with old friends. And one day, without planning, he met someone. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was calm, it was conversation, it was connection. This new woman didn't constantly ask him how he felt, but listened when he chose to speak. She had an easy laugh, a direct manner, and no fear of touching on difficult subjects. Little by little, Daniel began to smile again, truly. And he realized that, even with a scar on his chest, it was still possible to love. Emily only found out when she saw him by chance one cloudy afternoon, crossing the street with this new woman. They were holding hands, laughing about something she wouldn't hear. Time stopped for her. It was like watching a movie where the main character moved on and she, the one who betrayed him, was trapped in the frozen frame. That image wouldn't leave her mind. That night, she wrote a letter. It was long, painful, confusing. It spoke of fear, of insecurity, of how invisible she herself felt. She apologized without justifying, spoke of the love she still felt, of how much she now understood what she had truly lost. But she didn't send it. She kept it in a drawer, waiting for courage. That courage came weeks later. She found Daniel in the parking lot of a cultural center. He saw her first, standing beside his car, as if no time had passed. But as she approached, she realized, his eyes were no longer there. They were still the same eyes, but they carried a different piece, a different woman, a different life. She held out the letter, her hands trembling. He accepted it. He read it right there, in silence. When he finished, he looked at her with a pain that no longer bled. He said he didn't hate her, that he didn't want to see her suffer. But that everything she said, everything she felt now, had died the moment she chose another man instead of talking, instead of trying, instead of respecting what they had. Emily cried. She tried to hold his arm, but he gently pulled away. He said he forgave her. And he truly forgave her. But that he didn't want it anymore. And in that moment, she felt the true weight of the choice she had made. It wasn't just losing a partner. It was losing the future, the possibilities, the rituals, the plans. She lost the person who knew her even in the silences. And nothing she said, nothing she did, would bring back what had been destroyed by an act she herself chose to commit. And then life showed its final cruelty. A year later, Emily returned to her old neighborhood to visit a friend. She parked her car and, on impulse, drove past the building where she had lived with Daniel. The gate was different, the facade painted. She looked up at the floor where they had lived and saw the open windows. Inside, white curtains danced in the wind. And then, the balcony door opened. A couple came out. She recognized the man immediately. It was him. Daniel. He was there, in the same apartment, now renovated, with another woman. Emily held her breath. She didn't know what to feel. But what destroyed her, what truly shattered her inside, was what she saw next. The woman who now shared that home was someone she knew. She had greeted her at some old gatherings, perhaps even complimented her dress once. But she never, ever imagined it would be her. His new woman. And there she was, barefoot on the balcony, smiling at Daniel, holding a cup of coffee and a passionate look that had once been hers. Daniel leaned in, whispered something in the woman's ear, and she laughed loudly. Emily, motionless in the car, felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her. Not out of jealousy, not out of possessiveness, but from the stark realization, her place had been taken. That space, that routine, that gaze. Everything that had once been hers now belonged to someone else. And he was happy. Truly happy. Emily didn't get out of the car. She didn't honk, she didn't call out. She just started the engine and drove away. She didn't cry at that moment. She would cry later, alone, when she got home and leaned against the door. She would cry like someone who understands that there's no going back. That sometimes, the punishment isn't the immediate pain, but the silence of no longer being able to fix things. The kiss in the hallway was just the trigger. The real disaster came later, when she discovered that the person she betrayed had decided to move on without her, and that it was final. And in that final silence, in that distant gaze, it became clear, Emily hadn't just lost a man. She had lost the only home where she was truly loved. And that, no amount of time, no apology, no letter, could erase. Emily never returned to that neighborhood. The image of the couple on the balcony, the light laughter emanating from inside the apartment that was once hers, the tight embrace now reserved for another woman, all of it was etched too vividly for her to dare walk down that street again. She began to avoid places that reminded her of any trace of the past, as if by erasing the physical path, she could alleviate the internal journey of pain. She changed houses, neighborhoods, environments. She began to work in greater isolation, preferring to distance herself from conversations, comments, and people who might, even unknowingly, touch the wound that never fully healed. Her face, which once carried lightness, now lived seriously, wearily, as if each glance were burdened by a regret that had nowhere to be emptied. She tried to move on. She had other dates, met new people, exchanged messages that died in the superficiality of apps. But none of them had the depth she had felt years before. It wasn't about comparison, it was about connection. With Daniel, there was an invisible line of belonging, a silent fit in the little things, in the way she walked around the house, in the way she closed her eyes when she smiled, and he recognized that as his own language. That doesn't repeat itself, it can't be replaced, it can't be improvised. Over time, she understood that true love is a rare stroke of luck, and that sometimes we ruin everything for fear of not being seen, when in reality the other person was just too exhausted trying to keep everything afloat. Emily started writing in notebooks, as a way to release what she couldn't say. She recounted nights that hurt, memories that burned, conversations she wished she had had. It was like talking to the version of herself that existed before the fall. One day, while writing, she stopped her pen mid-sentence and cried like never before. It wasn't just pain. It was understanding. Realizing that the forgiveness she needed most wasn't his, it was her own. Meanwhile, Daniel's life continued steadily. The relationship that began without expectation was becoming the foundation of a new home, but it wasn't perfect, and he knew it. There were days when he woke up restless, remembering the past. But not out of longing for Emily, but rather for the versions of himself he had left behind. He had matured, learned to listen more, to identify silences, to be present even on days when routine seemed to swallow everything. His new partner was his mirror and also his foundation. She had firm opinions, but knew how to embrace with sweetness. The two didn't live as if trying to escape the past, but as if they had learned to respect it. The pain of yesteryear was no longer an open wound, but a scar that taught him every day the importance of presence, of care, of reciprocity. Daniel held no grudge, only the certainty that what had been destroyed one day had taught him to rebuild himself with more truth. Time passed, and an unexpected reunion took place. Not at parties, not on street corners, but inside a doctor's office. Emily, now a writer of short reflective texts, had been invited to an event about emotional health. Daniel was there as an observer, accompanying his current partner, who was one of the speakers. When Emily stepped onto the stage, their eyes met for a few seconds. There was no anger, no tension. Just a silent understanding between two people who knew everything they had been to each other, and everything they no longer were. She spoke about loss, about thoughtless choices, about rebuilding. She didn't mention names, but her truth pierced the room with an honesty that silenced even the applause. When she came down from the stage, Daniel went to her. He greeted her respectfully. She smiled discreetly. They exchanged few words. Are you okay, and yes, thank you, were enough. His new wife, beside her, greeted Emily with the same politeness. The past had been resolved there, in that brief moment when the three were face to face, without resentment, without confrontation, only with the recognition that some stories, however significant they may be, no longer belong to the present. Emily returned home that day in silence. She looked out the taxi window, lost in thought. She didn't cry, but she didn't smile either. She just felt. She felt she was closing something inside herself. Not because time erases everything, but because she had finally learned to accept that some losses are permanent. And that the greatest pain of betrayal isn't what it causes in the other person, it's what it steals from us. As for Daniel, leaving the event, he looked at the woman walking beside him and squeezed her hand tightly. She smiled, without saying anything, as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. It was the kind of complicity that can't be explained. It was love, but now lived with maturity, with presence, with truth. Each went their own way. Emily began writing about human relationships. She became a reference in texts about emotional reconstruction, started speaking at events, and helped other women not to lose themselves as she once did. Her words carried the pain she had lived through, but also the strength she had gained. Daniel built a new home, now with firmer roots, deeper conversations, and choices made together. He had children, taught them about loyalty, about listening, about repairing mistakes before they become irreparable. And every night, as he lay down, he knew he had survived the worst pain of all, the pain of feeling betrayed by the one he swore love to, and yet, he had the courage to love again. This is a story about consequences. About how a choice made in seconds can ruin a life built over years. About how regret, however sincere, cannot rebuild what was destroyed by impulse. It is also a story about new beginnings, about how true love demands presence, care, and mutual effort. And, above all, it is a story that screams a painful truth: betrayal not only breaks bonds, it annihilates futures. There is no going back when trust dies. And when you lose someone who once chose you truthfully, what remains is a void that no excuse can fill. If you've made it this far, comment below what you thought of this story. Which character touched you the most? Do you think true forgiveness is possible after betrayal? We want to know your opinion. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Here, every week, you'll hear impactful stories based on real life, with a single mission: to show how wrong choices can change the course of an entire life. And the reflection remains: betrayal is not just an act, it's a sentence. It destroys trust, dissolves families, crushes true love. It's like breaking a mirror: even if you glue the pieces back together, the image will never be the same. Remember, this channel does not support any kind of betrayal. Here, we tell stories to warn, to move, to show what many only understand too late. Until the next story. And don't forget, love is a decision. And betrayal is too.